I'm standing in Arkansas right now, but behind me, on the other side of the Mississippi River, is Memphis, Tennessee. The area that we're in right now is called West Memphis, Arkansas, but this exact spot in the 1800s was known as Hopefield, and today is a ghost town. My team and I were down here filming a documentary on the wreck of the Sultana, which blew up and burned only about a mile or two that way. And when we were down here, we found out about the ghost town, and we wanted to come in here in between our commitments of filming and see what we could find and do our best to document the town of Hopefield on the fly. While right now you don't see too much, this town has a rich history, from belonging to the Spanish, to the French, to the Americans, both the Confederates and the Union.
With so little left of this place, we somehow manage to unearth its story and discover at least one item that refuses to disappear.
This piece is definitely mid to late 1800s.
This was a town that endured defeat after defeat, yet clung to survival. But in this video, its memory rises once more.
The exciting story of Hopefield includes sabotage to railroads, to burnings by the Union, and even rampant disease spreading. It's a really thrilling story, and we're going to go through the site and see just how much of the history of the ghost town of Hopefield we can uncover, right here on Part-Time Explorer. When pioneers first carved out towns like Hopefield, life depended on the simplest things: sturdy hands, raw grit, and the tools that these pioneers carried with them. Out on what was then the frontier, you didn't have the big supply chains or stores on every corner. You relied on tools that were hand-forged, built to last, and able to do just about anything. That spirit is exactly what today's sponsor is keeping alive. ZPL and Company. They make tools the old-fashioned way. Solid, simple, dependable, and all hand-forged, just like the ones that the settlers and machinists for the Memphis and Little Rock Railroad would have carried right in Hopefield more than 150 years ago. In fact, Zach, who makes these, got part of his metalworks training at the Nevada Northern Railroad in Ely, Nevada. This copper scoop is handmade and feels like it belongs in an old frontier kitchen. It's a simple design that's been used for centuries, and it's perfect for scooping tea, coffee, spices, or anything else you want to use it for in the kitchen. You can even get it custom stamped. The crow's beak tool looks like the kind of thing that you would keep in a saddlebag or something. It's perfect for lifting, hooking, tightening, scraping, or any other odd job you might have for it. It's the kind of tool that would have been right at home in Hopefield's machine shop when the railroad came through. This is the High Plains lifter. Like the ghost towns of the 19th century, this tool faded into obscurity decades ago. Now that it's been rediscovered and reverse engineered by ZPL and Company, it's ready for another century. And the best part is, like the other tools, you can have it custom stamped with your own initials. And like everything else from ZPL, it is hand-forged in Charleston, South Carolina. Hopefield may have vanished, but the pioneer spirit that built it, that craftsmanship, the resourcefulness, that survives in tools like these. Visit ZPL and Company. By supporting them, you're carrying forward a tradition of American craftsmanship that's as enduring as the frontier itself.
This is going to be a challenge, a real challenge. Looking online and asking around at some of the local museums, it seems like nothing of this town remains. Hardly a memory. How do we even get to this place? Well, my starting point is a map of Memphis, Tennessee from the Library of Congress in 1865, or thereabouts. The city of Memphis is booming, despite the American Civil War having just ripped through it. Highways and railroads sprawl out in every direction, and docks bustle with shipping along its Mississippi riverfront. Across the Mississippi, though, is our target town, Hopefield, Arkansas. About a dozen streets lay the town out, and interestingly, it does have a railroad connection venturing off to the west. But look at that spot today on Google Earth. Holy smokes, it's completely different. We don't have a single landmark to orient ourselves with. The only thing we really can do is overlay our 1865 map onto Memphis across the river, match it up to the roads and natural features that haven't changed over the past 160 years, and then look back at Hopefield. We have to hope that this map is accurate, which it probably was within a reasonable degree. It places Hopefield right beneath the Hernando de Soto Bridge, named for the Spanish conquistador believed to be buried along these banks. The bridge carries Interstate 40 safely across the Mississippi River to the western states. Down under the bridge we go, along an access road intended for the bridge authority and utility companies. It leads us to an interesting, quiet little place. The highway traffic above is muffled to a dull and steady drone. It's a neglected patch of land now, partly a park, partly one of those discarded buffer zones along the roaring American highways. You know, those no-man's lands of riprap and brush and river mud. The site is underwhelming. But once, this was a town.
There is nothing left. I don't even see foundations. This land has been turned over so many times, both by tractors and by the river, that we're not going to find anything here. You can't even see the railroad bed.
Hopefield, an overly optimistic name for a place that suffered as much as it did. I can't decide if it's ironic or appropriate, because I guess you needed to be full of hope to stay devoted to developing this town site after all the challenges that it faced.
The first white settlement of this spot was in 1795. At the time, the United States was a brand new country, and this place where I'm walking was Spain. It was settled by a Dutchman named Benjamin Foy, who was given a land grant by the Spanish governor. In exchange, this would act as an outpost for the Spanish Empire against the growing United States. Here, Benjamin would act as an agent for Spain, collecting tariffs on river traffic that passed by and acting as a liaison with the native tribes. He initially settled where Memphis is today, before Memphis was there. That was on that side of the river before he was forced to relocate to here. You see, that side of the river was the United States. This side was Spain. He had made the rookie mistake of settling in the wrong country.
The United States was expanding, and American settlers were moving west. Spain had hoped that Foy's settlement, known as Foy's Point, would act as a deterrent for Americans considering moving into the area. His family and many of his extended family members came and settled the lands with him.
None of that early settlement remains. In fact, I don't think we have any drawings or maps of it. It likely would have consisted of a few log cabins, maybe a couple of tents, and perhaps a wooden fort.
In 1797, the town was renamed Campo de la Esperanza, Field of Hope. The area became French, and then almost immediately was given to the United States as part of the Louisiana Purchase in 1803. The name was changed, but the meaning was kept. Campo de la Esperanza was now Hopefield in the Louisiana Territory, in a region known as New Iberia. Old Benjamin Foy, Hopefield's first settler, stayed with the town. A decade prior, he was tasked with keeping the Americans out, and now he was a loyal American himself, becoming a businessman, justice of the peace, and even a U.S. magistrate. He managed to stay on top during the several peaceful treaties and land transfers. Foy was a stand-up man, building his modest settlement up into a respectable town over the following 2 decades. Hopefield had a head start in the area, being settled more than 30 years before Memphis across the river on the Tennessee side. But Memphis seemed to boom overnight. Investors poured money into the new city, settlers raced across the country to move in, and industry flourished. Benjamin Foy and little old Hopefield couldn't keep up. Benjamin died in 1823, and the town's reputation seemed to die with him. No longer was Hopefield the good town with morals. It was now the place where Memphis's criminal underground and fugitives ran to. It was the home of Memphis's rejects. It's even been said that this is where Tennesseans went to duel to the death when they had a disagreement, since dueling was outlawed in their home state.
The most famous of these duels took place in February 1845, long after Hopefield had taken on its rough and tumble reputation. Mr. Clancy of Memphis, Tennessee, across the river, and Mr. Thompson of Vicksburg, Mississippi, a little ways down the river, met here to duel with pistols. They both managed to wound one another, but Thompson then rushed over to Clancy, wounded, and stabbed him in the chest, finishing him off.
The town did, however, continue to grow. It had several streets with dozens of homes and hundreds of citizens. It had a jail, a courthouse, a post office, and presumably a school and saloons. One of the few surviving artifacts from Hopefield that I'm aware of is in the possession of the Crittenden County Museum here in Arkansas, and a 2016 post on their Facebook shows off this beautiful Bible from the Hopefield Methodist Church. They say that this Bible is circa 1800, so at the time of this video, it's about 225 years old. It's unbelievable to see this thing preserved in such good condition.
So we're on the outskirts of Hopefield right now, but Emma just found these two pieces of porcelain. And I know porcelain pretty well because I collect a lot of them from shipwrecks. This piece is definitely mid to late 1800s. It's kind of representative of the ironstone that comes over from England, whereas this piece is a lot harder to identify. It looks like it could also be ironstone, earlier 1800s, especially by that blue pattern on the side. This is probably a bowl or a bigger dinner plate, just judging by the arc that we can see in this small fragment. But these are absolutely from the era of Hopefield. Now, she found them out in the field right here, where a plow easily could have turned them over while going over the field. But we also have to remember, since we're in the floodplains of the Mississippi, who knows if these are pieces that just made their way down the river over the past century and a half and just coincidentally ended up at the Hopefield site. Is that actually a mark? That could be the corner of a maker's mark, but probably not because it's so close to the edge.
A military road was built between Hopefield and Little Rock, Arkansas, 130 miles to the west, allowing Hopefield to link the eastern states with the growing city of Little Rock. But Hopefield got its big break, however, in 1858. Railroads had come to Memphis the decade prior, and now the Arkansas side was being developed. The plan was to link Little Rock with Hopefield, then build a railroad ferry across the Mississippi River, thus linking Little Rock to the rest of the country by rail, and making Hopefield a massive transportation connector. The tracks were laid from Hopefield, traveling west for about 40 miles before the project paused. However, those 40 miles of track were functional during this hiatus. The rail ferry was built, better linking Hopefield with its Tennessee rival of Memphis, and with it came the telegraph lines, with Hopefield getting its own telegraph office. The age of modernism had reached the old Spanish outpost, and the town thrived.
There's so very little that still remains from Hopefield, but I do see two wooden posts over this way that I want to check out. They could be something of interest. Actually, they look like stumps. Yeah, they're just tree stumps.
Being the ferry connection, Hopefield became a depot. A rail shed, machine shop, water tower, and station were built here at Hopefield, but where exactly? There are several maps that show Hopefield's layout, but they all conflict with each other.
This is really confusing because we've got all these contradictory maps. But the one that has the location here, which is really cool because it says there's a rail depot right in this spot, but that's dated 1865 on the Library of Congress. Now, the city should have burned by that point already because the war's over. So the Union would have to have already burned it. They didn't burn it after the war. But the other maps show Hopefield is at what's now called Hopefield Point. The other side of that. Yeah, past the bridge, where the river starts to bend in. So what I think is those are probably later maps. So I know they rebuilt after the fire.
Yeah.
And what might be lost to history is just that they relocated.
Yeah.
Because this place is flooded all the time. They probably figured, well, we might as well go to a less of a flood zone.
Yeah. It'd probably be much easier to just kind of redevelop a untamed land versus trying to clean up all the remains of.
So I'm going to start calling this Old Hopefield. And then we've got New Hopefield up there.
Yeah.
There is nothing left of Old Hopefield.
I did see on a Google map as well, you can see it doesn't appear like it's being farmed right now because it just has a lot of overgrowth. But you can see on Google Maps the crop circles where the combine or tractor did its turns. So this was definitely farmed as well, which would have destroyed any.
That's just turning the dirt over.
Foundation.
Yeah. Plus the river flooding through here almost every year. That's constantly going to be. So there, any archaeological remains here that might still exist have to be buried.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this could be a piece of Hopefield. Seems kind of unnatural with how flat it is on the top.
Somewhere beneath this wet field, beneath lands that saw over 100 Mississippi flood seasons, beneath soil turned over by plow hundreds of times, is the old railroad bed and the foundations of Hopefield's depot for the Memphis and Little Rock Railroad.
Right over there, these groves of trees are actually on Hopefield Lake, which is a swamp now. But Hopefield Lake is visible on the older 1865 maps, which is actually why I trust those with the location more, because the lake is still there. With the river especially coming through here and flooding annually, obviously lakes are going to change position, but it's mostly the same shape. So that's why I think it is more or less in the same location. And that's why I trust those maps that show Hopefield Lake in that spot, coming right into the town. Basically the northern tip, which we can still kind of see today, going right up to the Memphis and Little Rock Railroad. The tip of that lake is the only real thing that's pointing to the location of the Memphis Little Rock Railroad rail depot. As the railroad from Little Rock, Arkansas came into Hopefield, it would have hit a switch and a branch line would have taken it at about a 45-degree angle towards the northern direction and the northern part of town. And that would have led to the ferry to head over the Mississippi into Memphis. But had the train gone straight at that switch, it would have taken it into the rail depot, where trains could have been serviced, where cargo could have been loaded up out of storage, anything like that. There would have been machine shops. It probably wasn't too large of a site, although Hopefield was becoming a fairly large town by the time this railroad was constructed.
The prosperity brought by the railroad was short-lived. In 1861, the American Civil War broke out and Arkansas seceded with the Confederacy. The railroad, still incomplete, was now used to carry Confederate troops mobilizing into rebellion. Gray-coated soldiers disembarked the train here at Hopefield, where they were stocked and readied for deployment. The rail depot buildings were repurposed by the Army into armories, with the railroad's machine shop being used to retool rifles for the Confederate Army. Troops would then cross the ferry into Tennessee and join up with armies preparing to ship out, perhaps on one of these riverboats, or perhaps on foot.
It's incredible to think that we are standing at what once was a military outpost. It's within the United States, and yet it served two different foreign nations. The Spanish Empire long ago, and then the Confederate States of America in the 1860s. This feels unique, to be at a place that served two foreign governments, and yet not the United States, but within the United States. And yet that uniqueness is not acknowledged, as the memory of this town is completely forgotten.
Memphis was captured early on in the war in June 1862, less than a year after the outbreak. Hopefield was no longer an arming point and troop hub, with American gunboats steaming up and down the river, a threat to any organizing body of rebels here. So instead, Hopefield became a base of action for guerrilla warfare. Confederate raiders vandalized the dormant Hopefield Railroad, exchanged the occasional sniper fire across the river, and even attempted to sabotage the Memphis and Hopefield ferry service. And that was the last straw.
Major General Hurlburt, commander of the Union forces in Memphis, ordered his troops across the river to destroy Hopefield once and for all. the civilians were given 1 hour to gather their belongings and evacuate the town. Hopefield was then burned to the ground, with one barn going up in a giant explosion when an unreported gunpowder cache ignited.
The charred ruins now became a base of action for the remaining raiders who hadn't yet abandoned their cause, who continued to harass the Union forces across the river. Along the river, they watched from cover as the steamboats moved enemy Union troops back and forth, and they occasionally picked an unsuspecting vessel to pillage for supplies. The town was in ruin, a restricted zone, and still not rebuilt as the war came to an end in 1865. But hitting Hopefield while the town was already down, the river flooded violently that spring. The Mississippi swelled its banks, and Hopefield was almost completely submerged. Steamboats plied down its streets, taking shortcuts by cutting corners across floodwaters on what was usually dry land. In the early hours of April 27, 1865, the sunken ruins of Hopefield lay quiet and cold, isolated. An overcrowded steamboat made its way up the Mississippi, loaded with almost 2,000 newly paroled Union POWs, released from southern prison camps, finally making their way home. This was the steamboat Sultana, and as it rounded the bend just above Hopefield, the boilers blew. The ship detonated, blowing outward and then collapsing back in on itself, igniting a fire that would consume the entire vessel. One of these Confederate raiders, one who no doubt conferred with his allies among the ruins of Hopefield, spotted this flaming vessel, jumped in his dugout boat, and rowed out to the stricken vessel. This was Frank Barton, who lived just outside of Hopefield, now risking his own life to save his enemy. Frank ended up saving the lives of 15 Union soldiers that night, bringing them home and feeding them. He had rescued them from the worst maritime disaster in American history, unfolding right here on Hopefield's doorsteps. As the Sultana burned and collapsed, debris and bodies made their way down the river, drifting among the ruins of Hopefield, remnants of a hellish nightmare coming to rest among the obliterated homes from an unrelated tragedy. But as the floodwaters receded, there was still hope for Hopefield. The railroad between Little Rock and Hopefield was finally completed in 1871. The rail depot, previously torched by Union forces, was rebuilt, and the town's population grew once more to several hundred people.
It's the Memphis and Little Rock Railroad.
Yeah.
So the railroad would come all the way from Little Rock, Arkansas, out to Memphis. But this was before a bridge was built. So it would actually come here to Hopefield, and that's the end of it. The railroad never got to Memphis.
And then they had the wharf or whatever.
Yes.
Harbor.
There's a ferry that crosses over. So really, it should be the Hopefield and Little Rock with a ferry extension to Memphis.
But like every prosperity in Hopefield, it was short-lived. The town's hope was once more dashed when yellow fever ravaged the town in 1873, and again in 1878, reducing the population down to just 150. Floods continued to drown the town's future until the riverbanks along the northern part of the town collapsed, destroying a chunk of the town's business and residential district. The railroad depot needed to be relocated, but the ferry service continued. Even that, however, wasn't safe. Other railroads came to the Arkansas riverfront and bypassed the Hopefield ferry, creating other ferry crossings to the south and eventually railroad bridges, eliminating the need for the ferry entirely. The Hopefield ferry was the last strand of the pioneer community that once tamed this western shore of the Mississippi, but that finally died around 1916. In the post-Civil War period of the ferry service, the primary vessel that plied back and forth between Hopefield and Memphis was known as the General Pearson. She was a reliable little steamer built in Illinois in 1877 and owned directly by the Memphis and Little Rock Railroad, the only vessel on their roster. In April 1892, a storm broke her loose from her moorings in Hopefield, and she blew across the river to Memphis. She lost her stacks and her wheelhouse, but the ship was rebuilt and returned to service. When the ferry service went under, the ship was retired. She was laid up in Memphis on the waterfront, and she sank in 1917. Her wreckage still lies beneath the waves along the very waterway that she traveled back and forth on. Several floods in the 1910s wiped away any buildings that remained, and their final residents abandoned all hope, leaving behind their beloved but unlucky community. As we walked around Hopefield, every step we took stirred up the dirt. The ground sunk in, and thousands of ants swarmed under every footstep. Some maps placed Hopefield a little farther to the north than the place that we surveyed. Just to make sure we dot our I's and cross our T's, let's check that place out too. But a great prairie storm is brewing, so our time is running out. This place on the north side seems to be a park just as the other location was.
At the other site, we were looking at an 1865 map of Hopefield. I have an 1891 map, which shows a very similar town plan, but puts it up here. This is about a mile or two from where we just were. So the maps are that far off, which is why I'm thinking that because it's the 1890s, 30 years after the Civil War, they relocated Hopefield in the Reconstruction era. Puts Hopefield right here. Now today on Google Maps, this exact spot is called Hopefield Point. The only ruins in this area are fairly recent, and that's what we're going to explore right now. Doesn't date all the way back to the 1890s, but I'm sure it has a story to tell.
At the northernmost extent of the town site of Hopefield today is a concrete pad in the ground. This seems to be the only ruin on the site, though given the construction method, I think this building was a bit newer than old Hopefield. A gas station? A garage? It's unclear.
That's definitely 1800s.
Yeah, right. I don't know, man. This could go all the way back to the Spanish cinder blocks, yeah.
We stand on what used to be a town and feel nothing but the slow, patient work of the earth. Floods came again and again, folding streets into rivers, swallowing foundations and flinging timbers like driftwood. Then generations of plows toiled over that same ground, iron teeth turning graves into ordinary soil, wagon wheel ruts smoothed into field rows, house sites mixed into seed beds. Memory, too, was tilled. Names that were once on stones and signs were ground down and carried away. Where there were courts and schools and rail sheds, there is now only the sound of vehicles on a bridge and a distant, different flow of the Mississippi. Hopefield did not vanish in a single flash. It was erased in slow gestures, fire, water, and the steady churn of farming, until even the story itself seemed to lie fallow. Standing here, you have to ask, what does it mean to be gone? For Hopefield, being gone is not an absence of history but a disguise. The past reworked into the ordinary earth, waiting for someone to notice the small, stubborn traces. A shard of porcelain, a misplaced brick, the ghost of a track under the plow line. Thank you for taking this time to explore the ghost town of Hopefield with me, if you can call this a ghost town. Thank you as well to this video's sponsor, ZPL & Company. Check out their store of hand-forged tools at the link in the description below. And of course, a big thanks to my supporters on Patreon, and without them, this would not be possible. Thank you especially to Marlo Perez, Kelly Black, Kaiser Wilhelm II, Kaiser Friedrich III, Zach Richards, Donald Anderson, Cody Henricks, Joan Haynes, Sean Kimball, Glenn Biddiscombe, Stephen Schwankert, Gabriel Colomb, RGB, Tara Mullicar, Keith Holland, Rob M., Amos Mayhew, Corey Andrews, Nicholas Masella, Cole Tannick, Sophie Baber, Rob, Oliver Chin Chen, John Maluski, David Watipka, Tiffany Raridan, Mad Time Media, Nathan Gutierrez, Max Metcalf, David Littlejohn, Sean Sahi Fraser, Nikki Chan 92, Corbin McDonald, Matthew Burns, Goblin of the Salt Plains, Luke Stevens, Gordon Robbins, Aaron Stark, Troy Wentworth, Clarkey, Sam Forker, Busy B, Christopher Rosendale, Road Weary, Kitty Bits, Taniel 38, Kenzo Buick, Brian Reedy, Eden Cleefish, Bless Moles, Coda Yoda 16, Carol Adams, Clay Hobbs, Steve Valley, Gojira Strains, JC Hobbs, High Treason, The Peppermilk, Tristan White, Jason Stray, Chance Hudson, Robert Mayer III, Jordan Page, The Handler, Georgia T., Drew Shelton, Craven Moorhead, Jennifer and Sarah Vaughn, Ben Reese, Kenneth Hendricks, Aaron Prochaska, David Douglas, Alan and Modesta Charlone, Eric Castle, Lottie Katz, Jean Kennedy, Lilia Bean, Bianca Signorini, Greg The Fox Bauer, Jeffrey Gautier, Tim C., Paul Bowman, Hope Harvey, Heidi Geldian, and GamerChick42.